turned on the recording. I'm also going to turn on the captioning, so you should see that at the bottom. We'll have a few people that are joining us. Okay. And while they're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the presenters. So if you could please mute your mic or your phone. I'm going to introduce the presenters now. We're very pleased to have them here today. We have Dr. Robert Stevens and Dr. Erica Wondolowski. Dr. Robert Stevens, PhD, CRC, LPC, is an assistant professor of rehab sciences at Arkansas Tech University. Dr. Stevens holds a PhD in counselor education and supervision with a specialty in rehabilitation counselor education from Ohio University. Dr. Stevens has been a CRC for 18 years, an LPC for 6 years, and has worked in multiple areas of rehabilitation clinical work. Dr. Stevens' research interests are working with clients in adjusting to life with chronic illness and disability, and working with clients who identify as LGBTQIA+. Dr. Stevens has presented at state, regional, and national conferences on these and other topics. And we also have Dr. Erica Wondolowski, PhD, CRC. She is an assistant professor of rehabilitation science at Arkansas Tech University as well. Dr. Wondolowski holds a PhD in rehabilitation counselor education from Michigan State University and has previously worked for the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. Her research interests include sexual health and expression of people with disabilities, diversity and inclusion, and social justice law and movements. She has presented extensively on these topics as well as others at the national, regional, and local levels. So we want to thank you both for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Jason, I need to turn around and look.
All righty. Well, thank you all for being here. Hopefully you can see me now. Turn my camera on. I'm Dr. Rob Stevens, or Robert Stevens. Most people call me Rob if they're not my students. So, and we're excited to be with you all today. So, Dr. Wondolowski, let's move to the next slide. So this is just an overview of what we're going to be talking about, some of the things we're going to be talking about today. So one thing that I want to make clear, if you are not part of the LGBTQIA population, is that it may be offensive if you say to your client that you're making a lifestyle choice, and I put that in quotations. Not all people that identify as LGBTQIA may see it as they've made a choice to be gay or a choice to be transgender. A lot of people just feel like it's who they are. Some people feel like they were born that way. So be careful with words like that because they can have so much stigma and stereotypes attached to them that can alienate a client from you being able to work with them. Also be careful with the language you use. We're going to talk about that today, so you'll be more familiar with language that is appropriate. I ask you to be respectful and keep your personal feelings, morals, and values out of the working relationship. Our code of ethics actually tells us to do that. So, you know, I'm not asking you today to change your personal morals and values that you have known your whole life, but I'm asking you to find some kind of common ground. Be respectful. It is okay to ask your clients questions. It's okay, definitely okay for you to ask Dr. Wondolowski questions today. We actually encourage that because if you have a question and you don't ask it, then how are you going to know the answer to it? So please ask us your questions today as we go through this. We want this to be a very open dialogue today. But be careful with asking too many questions to your clients that might identify as LGBTQ+, because it may overwhelm them, or they may feel like, I'm not your educator. So you kind of have to find with each individual client, what is the okay amount of questions to ask. And learning is key. And we hope that by the time we're done today, that you will have learned quite a bit of new information. Okay. So I want to ask you this question, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a question that is asked of people in the LGBTQ plus IA plus community all the time. When did you know that you were gay? When did you know that you were transgender? So think about it for a minute. When did you know that you were your sexual orientation or gender identity? Have you known all your life? Is it something that as a teenager you started to figure out? Okay, well, I'm attracted to men, so therefore I guess that I am a cisgender female. Or, you know what, I'm attracted to men, so I guess I'm a cisgender gay male. So when did you kind of figure that out? How old were you when you first realized that you were attracted to the person that maybe you're in a relationship with or that you're married to? Or the people that are in your dating pool if you happen to be a single person. And how would you feel if somebody told you that your identity is a choice? Okay. So just think about that for a few minutes. And if we have any comments, I welcome that. But if not, then we'll move on. It's kind of a rhetorical question, I guess. So alphabet soup, you've heard me say it already, LGBTQIA+. So what does that all mean? A lot of people really get confused with terminology. So in the presentation, you'll see sometimes it's just LGBTQ+. Other times you may see that it's LGBTQIA+. As long as there's a plus sign on the end of it, you're usually being inclusive. Because there are so many different terms that are used to describe people in this community. So some of the ones that you may be more familiar with, like gay, lesbian, and bisexual. Others that maybe you're not as familiar with, like cisgender, transgender, non-binary, or others that you might have questions about. And the information that we'll be sending to the organizers of this training, Dr. Benton and Karen, you will receive a copy of the PowerPoint and you will receive a resource packet. And it'll have a lot of links to glossaries of terms and other information that will help you become more of an advocate and an ally for this population. So first chance to really open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions about terminology that maybe you've heard, but you're really not sure what it means? Even if it's one on the screen. So everybody's experts, I guess, because I'm not hearing anything.
I'm not an expert, but I do have a question. I don't know if this is going to be a part of that, but here's my question.
Okay.
Why labeling he, she, it has changed? So I guess I'm not biased to it, but why would we have to put, let me see what this paper says. It says on this paper, it says she, her.
Mm-hmm.
What's she, her? We know you, I mean, why are we making, help me, maybe I'm not saying it right. Why we have to label she, her on paperwork?
Okay, we're going to talk about pronouns here in a few minutes. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna pause on that question, but we are going to address that. And I think a lot of people get confused with pronouns. And so we have a whole slide about pronouns here in just a couple of minutes about why that is important to people in the LGBTQ plus community. So great question, and we're going to get to it.
Well, we do have two comments in the chat.
Oh, okay.
We have a question. Somebody would like to ask what the definition of cisgender is, and
Okay.
also non-binary.
Okay. Great questions. So cisgender is someone, a person whose gender identity matches the gender that they were assigned at birth. So for me, I was assigned male at birth because when I was born, the doctor said, okay, we have a boy. So on my birth certificate, it says that I am male. And psychologically, I also identify as male. So I have no gender dysphoria. I was assigned male at birth, and I identify as male. So I'm a cisgender male. That's just a way to describe people that their gender assigned at birth matches their gender that they identify with. Whereas transgender is the opposite. So someone that is transgender was assigned female at birth, but as they've grown up and as they've matured, they identify more as female. So therefore, their gender marker that they were assigned at birth does not match with how they psychologically identify as a person. So that's the difference between cisgender and transgender. It's a little bit new of a term. that you're hearing more and more with cisgender. Now with non-binary, I have a definition for that too, because this is very common questions in the trainings that I do with these. So non-binary is a person whose gender identity does not conform to the gender binary. So they kind of fall somewhere along a spectrum of male, female, or somewhere in between. I will tell you, I am the faculty sponsor for our student group. It's called Spectrum. It's an LGBTQ plus student group here at Arkansas Tech. And I have a lot of students that are identifying now as non-binary because they know that they're not 100% male. They know that they're not really 100% female. They're not really comfortable with transgender because they really are not a trans man or a trans woman. So they just go with non-binary. It's kind of an umbrella term to help somebody that's really trying to figure out who they are. Okay. So they may come to your office and be more masculine in dress one day, and they may come to your office again another day and they may look more feminine because that's how they're expressing themselves that particular day. So non-binary is kind of an umbrella term of, I don't really fit the male or the female stereotypical characteristics. So I'm just going to call myself non-binary because I kind of fall somewhere in between. Does that help answer those questions? Okay. I guess we can move forward then. So one thing that was asked of us to really kind of clarify is definitions of sex, gender, and sexual orientation. So I'm not going to read these just verbatim to you because I think we can all read, and again, you'll have copies of all this information. But everybody's assigned a gender at birth. A lot of doctors in the medical community are really kind of shy away from labeling a child what is nowadays called intersex. It used to be called hermaphrodite. We don't really call people that are born with ambiguous genitalia or genitalia of both genders a hermaphrodite anymore, just because of the fact that that word has become very laden with stereotypes and stigma. So now the term is intersex. A lot of doctors will ask parents to make a decision at birth. You know, it looks like this child has ambiguous genitalia, but the child looks to have more male genitalia to me. Do you want me to do a corrective surgery? Some advocates in the LGBTQ plus community don't think that those surgeries should be done on an infant, that we should wait and kind of see how the child presents. But it's up to the family to decide what to do in those situations. So we're all assigned a sex at birth, okay? And again, it's usually based on what genital characteristics are there. Is there a penis and a scrotum, or is there a vagina there? Next. Sexual orientation is really the emotional, romantic, and sexual relationships that we have with others. Okay, so if you are a cisgender female, then that means you probably date cisgender males. Okay, that's your sexual orientation. You are considered straight and you are cisgender. You don't have any, which I'm kind of blending into the gender expression there. Whereas if someone is gay, their sexual orientation is that they're either gay or lesbian or maybe even bisexual or pansexual, because that they don't date the stereotypical norm of cisgender straight people. So as a gay man, then they're probably going to date other gay men or maybe even date some bisexual men occasionally. A lesbian is probably mostly going to date other lesbians, but may end up dating a bisexual woman. Gender expression goes more into a lot of the external manifestations of gender. So what is the preferred name of our client if they identify as transgender or non-binary? How do they dress? What kind of haircut do they have? These are all things that we express our gender expression through. So for instance, some people in the trans community may wear a chest binder to hide their breasts if they are identifying more as a trans man. If they don't want to have surgery, or they don't have the money to do that option, to make themselves look more masculine. Men may do certain clothing, layers of clothing, to hide a bulge in the pants, for instance, so they can look more feminine. So it's all about gender expression. Do we have any questions about any of those three? Or Dr. Wondolowski, do you have anything to add?
What is pan?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
What is pansexual?
Pansexual is someone who is attracted to people of any and all genders. So a pansexual person might, they don't really look at gender per se when they're looking for someone to date or someone to be in a relationship with. One of my students identifies as pansexual, and the way that the student explained it to me was, I don't look at the person's outer appearance. I look more at their personality. I look more at their genuineness, and I'm attracted more to the person than what the exterior equipment is. So I don't really care if they have a penis or a vagina. I care more about, I have this connection with this person and I feel like I can be in a relationship with them. So pansexual is just, the only thing that's really different between pansexual and bisexual is pansexual is someone that will date any gender, whereas bisexuals stereotypically, and I say that because that is changing a lot in a lot of the research that I read lately about bisexual people. And these two definitions of pansexual and bisexual are kind of becoming an umbrella term where a lot of people are using those interchangeably. Whereas typically in the past, bisexual would be someone that dated males or females. Pansexual will date someone that might be transgender or non-binary. And it kind of adds that layer to it.
One thing that I'd like to add also is that when we're specifically talking about gender, sex, and sexual orientation, we have to realize that apart from sex, because sex is based on the biology, it's essentially it's what you're working with, it's the machinery of it, right? But sexual orientation, gender expression, those are all things that are kind of housed within these societal constructs of what is deemed appropriate or not. So you'll see, like for gender expression, the definition says the external manifestations of gender. But typically when people consider gender, they think male or female. We also have individuals who identify as gender nonconforming. And so it's not that I want to express myself as being female or male. I just want to be me. You know, early on when Dr. Stevens started, he was speaking about the importance of finding out who your clients are. And you can do that very easily just by saying, how would you like me to refer to you? Instead of making snap judgments about who they are based on what you're perceiving, which is, again, influenced through your worldview and through your interpretation of societal expectations.
Thank you. That was great. A great point to clarify some of that. So I think we've covered a little bit of this already, but I will just leave it up here for a second and see if anybody has any questions about anything you see on this screen. I kind of jumped ahead and talked about several of these definitions, and people ask good questions about some of these. So any questions about any of the terminology on the screen?
So I have a question. So let me just make sure I'm not confused. Okay, you said pansexual would date anybody, but it's not the sexual part, it's just the part of being attracted to that person itself, nothing dealing with the equipment. So hypothetically speaking, I'm a woman. I might be attracted to another woman, but I'm attracted to her personality, not the equipment, right? Or
Correct.
I might be attracted to a male, but I'm not attracted to his equipment. I'm attracted to his personality, his, you know, the way he looks, things like that. So wouldn't that be okay? Okay, I'm trying not to get confused because y'all, I just got confused. So I just want to make sure pan is just a general the attraction to oneself, or for as the way they look, the attitude, how they carry themselves, but not the actual equipment of the person.
That's the way it was explained to me by one of my students who identifies as pansexual. Is it's not really the equipment per se, it's the human connection. So that's the way I kind of changed the definition, because the definition just says someone who's attracted to people of any and all genders. That's the pansexual definition. So that's the way I kind of keep it straight in my head, because I don't identify as pansexual. So I can't put myself in somebody's shoes that is pansexual. But that's how I've kind of made it make sense in my head, is that it's about the human connection, not about gender, not about equipment. I like this person because this person is a good person, and that's what attracts me to them. And that's why I'm going to date this person. Doesn't matter if they're male, female, or trans, or non-binary. Good. I'm glad y'all are asking questions. I think this is really great.
Yeah, it's about the emotional intimacy is
Yes.
really what it gets to. It's about expressing that with whoever you find that really connects with you at a incredible level. And, you know, whether there's penetration or different expressions in the sexual expression of it, it doesn't sway you one way or the other.
Right. Good point.
You know, the other thing I want to make sure that we're addressing as well is that oftentimes, especially when you are from maybe conservative households or societies, some of these terms may already kind of have a negative connotation just based on the stereotypes and things that you've been surrounded by for much of your life. You know, here in the middle of the slide, we have drag queen versus transgender. And then I'm sure many of you who might be, you know, middle-aged have heard the term transvestite.
Mm-hmm.
And so there has been this history of pathologizing what it means to express a sexual orientation or a gender other than opposite sex, you know, attraction, assigned at birth, matching your gender expression and how you identify. And it doesn't have to be pathologized.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know?
I included the drag queen versus transgender on there because I had a question at my last training of, well, people that do drag, they're all transgender, right? And that's not true. There are some people that do drag because they do it as an art form. They have no desire to change their gender. It's just they love the art of drag, and that's why they do drag. I know one particular person, he's a gay man. He is, you know, cisgender gay man, but does drag full time as his career, and has been very successful, has raised millions of dollars for charities doing drag, but he has absolutely no desire to change his gender. It's just his way of doing artistic expression. RuPaul's Drag Race had its first transgender contestant this year that made the top 4. So there are some people in the transgender community that do drag. But that was one thing that a question last time was, you know, well, all people that are transgender are just drag queens. No, not necessarily. You can't lump people in a box just because it makes you feel comfortable. Or maybe you've heard that before, and it's not necessarily the case for every single person. If you walk away with nothing else, just remember that each individual client that you work with that's in the LGBTQIA+ community is going to have their own individual story. in their own individual way that they describe themselves. So really be careful with stereotypes and stigma that you've heard, that you don't lump people into a category that they don't want to be in.
Yeah, something else that I also wanted to mention here too is there are men who like to wear feminine undergarments. And it's just because it's a sensation for them. And ladies, we got some pretty nice undergarments, so I don't blame them. But it has nothing to do with their sexual orientation or gender expression necessarily. It may just be, you know what? I think I look cute in these and it makes me feel attractive, or I feel alive, you know? So again, we're never going to sit here and tell you what you should or should not believe.
Right.
But as providers at your multitude of organizations, what we are asking you to do is respect the client. Just as a basic human being, respect that they have a story, that they have an experience and a worldview that might be different from yours. And unless you're in Christian counseling or, you know, some other conversion therapy, your opinions, you're entitled to them as well. But it's not necessarily the place to express them when you're working with clients.
Yeah, and keep in mind that CRC and the American Counseling Association, they are not in support of conversion therapy, since Dr. Wondolowski brought that up. I didn't have that in the slides, but that if you talk to or watch anything about conversion therapy, a lot of LGBTQ plus people that have experienced that talk about the trauma that they experienced by being forced to go and do something like that. But again, if you have a client that comes to you and says, you know, I think I'm gay, but I don't want to be, then again, we have to support the client where they are in their journey. I've had that happen. I had a client when I was working in the field come to me and say, I think I'm gay, I don't want to be. And all I ever said was, well, how can I support you at this time? It wasn't my place to say, well, come on out of the closet and be yourself. If they weren't ready to do that, I was just going to damage the counseling relationship by forcing them into something that they weren't ready for. But I also wanted to provide them resources. I did not provide them resources for conversion therapy. I don't support that. But I did, you know, give them resources for both accepting a LGBTQ lifestyle and what can you do if you don't want to be LGBTQ plus. The client ended up deciding to come out later down the road in the counseling relationship. But when I first met the client, they were not in a headspace where they wanted to be gay. And like I said, I had to meet the client where they were, even though it was hard for me to be like, okay, you know, I'm going to support you for who you are and I'm going to support you where you are. So, all right, let's move forward. So there's two different diagrams here that talk about a lot of these definitions that we just talked about: gender expression, gender identity, anatomical sex, sexually attracted to, and romantically attracted to. All these kind of fall spectrum. So we have gingerbread person. I like the gingerbread person, but I really like the gender unicorn a little bit better, which is the next slide. Maybe it'll move forward. There we go. And it kind of shows you the spectrum here of with gender identity. We have people that identify as female, people that identify as male, and we have people that identify as this one calls it, other genders. That would be transgender, non-binary. Then we have gender expression. People may be more feminine, more masculine, or kind of fall somewhere in between. There you see intersex there with sex assigned at birth, so female, male, or intersex. And physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to are two separate spectrums. So we may be physically, like I'll self-disclose, I am an openly gay male. I may be physically attracted to a woman. I find women beautiful, but I'm sorry, I might be emotionally attracted to women, but physically, I don't have any desire to be with a woman romantically. So emotionally, I have great connections. Some of my best friends are women. I actually get along really well, better with women sometimes than I do men, because I don't know why. I can't explain it. It's just I have a better emotional connection to women a lot of times. So that's kind of where my spectrum falls, and each client's going to be a little bit different. So you may have a lesbian client, for instance, that really has problems with cisgender males. Like, they just do not get along with cisgender males. So if they get assigned to a male rehab counselor, for instance, or a male mental health counselor, that may not be a good fit. And we may need to make what I call a warm handoff referral to someone that is a better fit. So again, you'll get all these resources. So what the person's question earlier about pronouns, I told you we would get to this. Everybody has a right to their pronouns. My pronouns are he, him, his. Dr. Wondolowski, do you want to share yours?
I use she, her, hers.
So and it's okay to ask your client. Oh, we went forward. There we go. It's okay to ask your client, what pronouns do you want me to use with you? Most people in the LGBTQ plus community are not going to be offended if you ask. Okay. It's just seen as respectful. Now, there are some people that don't use traditional pronouns. So people that identify as transgender or non-binary, they may use some of these non-binary pronouns. So they may use they and them and theirs. Or there's even some more, I don't have a lot of students right now that are using some of these other ones like z's, er, and zers, but I have heard people that do. And there's a whole laundry list of other ones. If you search for, or you go to this mypronouns.org, a link, and again, you'll get all these links. So the question earlier was, why do we have to list our pronouns? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because you asked the question earlier and I said we would get back to it.
My question was, why? Okay, so for example, I'm a female,
Mhm.
and I go to wherever I go, and on my tag or on my paperwork, they automatically put her. They automatically put she and her, which I'm confused when you didn't ask me. You just go ahead and put it on there, I guess, to make it inclusive. But if I'm neither gay, straight, or whatever, I'm just asexual, or whatever it is. Why assume to put that on your label, then not act? It's like now we are conforming to she or her or him or things like that. I mean, I guess I'm old fashioned and I'm stuck in there, so I'm trying to adapt. But
Right.
It's like, I guess you're trying to make it inclusive where you won't discriminate against anybody. So you just put that on everybody's.
Yeah, we should always ask. We should never assume pronouns, because if we assume pronouns, then we're probably going to make a mistake, especially if somebody appears in the way that they dress or the way that they style their hair that's a little bit more androgynous. I've made mistakes with my students. I have students that use the they, them, and their pronouns. And Dr. Wondolowski and I were talking about this as we were putting this presentation together. Visually, what you see with the way somebody presents themselves doesn't always these days match up with the assume that they would use. So for instance, if I have a client standing in front of me and they look very feminine in the way that they're dressed, the way that they have their makeup and their hair done, and I assume that I can use she, her, and hers, I may offend that client because I didn't ask. And they go by they, them, theirs, or they go by a different set of pronouns. So I love the fact that a lot of agencies are starting to put on the demographic page where you can list your pronouns. So that way, as a counselor, when we get that intake paperwork before we even meet that client, then we already know what pronouns to use. But it's okay in that intake interview or that first time you meet a client to say, my name is Dr. Robert Stevens and I go by he, him, his. How would you like me to address you? That opens that door. It lets that client know Oh, okay, they're educated and they want to be respectful. So did that answer your question about pronouns?
Uh, I guess
It can be really confusing until you
I'm just, I guess
go on.
I'm just confused. I, I mean, but I guess we have to go through this process. I'll, I'll understand more. I'm just trying to make sure I don't offend none of my students. And so
Mhm.
things to make everybody inclusive. I don't know, so I won't offend anyone.
Right. And I mean, the best we can do when we're trying to learn is just try to practice it, try to be respectful. And the thing I have found with my students, if I do make a mistake, don't make a huge deal out of it, because sometimes you'll embarrass a student or embarrass a client when you make a big deal out of it. The first time I accidentally called one of my students the wrong pronoun in Spectrum, I made a huge deal out of it. I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I just called you the wrong pronouns. I will try to do better. And the student stopped me and was like, you're embarrassing me. Just say, oops, correct yourself and move on. Like, don't make a big deal out of it, because I'm so tired of people making a big deal out of it when they make a mistake. We're all human. We all sometimes make a mistake. Just say, oops, sorry, correct it and move on. So that's kind of been my practice that I've adopted since then of we're human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to accidentally call somebody by the wrong name, or we're actually going to call somebody by the wrong pronoun. Apologize and move on. That's the best we can do. Okay. With documentation and being inclusive, a lot of times it's non-inclusive. So for instance, gender is only male or female. It may not have where you can put partner or other terms that LGBTQ plus people may use instead of the regular married, divorced, widowed. And sometimes having to mark other is uncomfortable for people in the LGBTQ plus community. Um, can't put their pronouns on there. Um, so as an ally and an advocate, trying to advocate for whatever agency or university that we work for, that we're trying to make the documentation more inclusive. Okay. This is one that I definitely wanted to talk about: preferred name versus dead name. This is really when we're talking about our transgender and our non-binary clients or students. So to me, dead name sounds horrible, but again, I'm not part of the community. But dead name means that that was the name that was given to them at birth that they may no longer go by. So for instance, person was named Michelle, which is typically a feminine name, but now they go by Michael, typically more of a masculine name. One problem we're having here at Tech is our systems are a little bit hard to go in and change to a preferred name. So I'll get an email from one of my students and it has their birth name, but that is not what they want me to call them. So I have to make sure I go in and I change the role and I try to make sure I call them by the name that they want to be called. This is very a sign of respect for our clients and students that are transgender or non-binary. So some stigma and stereotypes of the LGBTQ plus community. Some of these are ones that I personally experienced, and some of these are some that come from the research. So don't make the assumption that sexual orientation is a choice. A lot of people in the community do not feel that they had a choice. All gay men are not feminine and flamboyant, and all lesbians are not masculine and butch. Again, there's a spectrum with how people express their gender expression. Transgender people have a mental illness. Yes, they do have a DSM diagnosis a lot of the time, so they can get their hormones, so they can get the treatment that they need. But there's a lot of stereotypes and stigma that transgender people. I actually had someone in a presentation send me a private message and say, well, transgender people are just broken people and they need help. And I'm not transgender, but to me, that was one of the most offensive comments that I've ever had. And I went to my supervisor and was like, what can I do about this? This is not okay. There is mental health problems that run in the LGBTQ plus community, which we'll address a little bit later, but doesn't mean that they have a mental illness. Bisexual people are promiscuous is another one. That doesn't necessarily is true. I know some bisexual people that are in a closed, committed relationship, and they're very happy in those types of relationships. Next. Drag queens are also transgender. I kind of already talked about that one. Gay and transgender men are predators and are pedophiles. This was really pushed when all the bathroom bills were happening several years back of we can't allow trans men to be in the female or trans women to be in the female bathroom, and we don't need trans men in the male's bathroom. That's not true. If you look at statistics, a lot of people that do crimes such as predators and pedophiles are actually not LGBTQ plus people. Gay men are more likely to have HIV and STDs. While it does run high in that population of people, anybody can get HIV or STD if you're not practicing safe sex. You cannot be LGBTQIA plus and religious. While there is a lot of religions out there that are not welcoming to the LGBTQ plus community, there are some that are. And so people that are in the community that want to have a religious home, there are options out there, and there are websites and resources to help you locate a church that will be accepting of you. And the last one is that members of the LGBTQIA plus community recruit straight people. No offense, but that's not part of my job. Like, if somebody wants to be part of the community, I welcome them with open arms, but I'm not actively out there picking people at random and being like, okay, you're going to be with me now. And there's people that actually believe that. So next.
Oh, sorry. I always find that part hilarious. You know, that you're going to cough on them and like give them the gay or something.
Magically.
Yeah. But something else I also wanted to point out, just because this is a fun fact that I know, is that for number 7, does anybody want to take a guess at who are more likely to be predators and pedophiles?
It's a taboo subject.
Cisgendered white men.
Yep.
So I'm just going to leave that one there.
And a lot of times, I'm not justifying their behavior, but a lot of times it's because they have had those things happen to them as kids, and then they end up being offenders as well.
But
So
it's the more traditional communities that are working off of a fear factor to continue the status quo.
Correct. Good point. Is this yours, Wandalowski, or is this me?
You.
Okay. Discrimination and bullying with people with disabilities. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of statistics that people with disabilities experience high levels of discrimination, and a lot of kids and even adults have bullying and cyberbullying. So there's a little bit of statistics here. 15% of the world population is estimated to be living with disabilities according to the World Health Organization. It's really the only one of the few minority groups that you can join at any time in your life. I actually joined the disability community at age 30 because of some medical issues that happened. And so I am a person living with chronic illnesses and disabilities. So less chance for equal rights for socioeconomic outcomes. As we know, most of us in this room are rehabilitation counselors or work in the field. Employment levels are drastically low for people with disabilities. unless they come to agencies like vocational rehabilitation to try to get help. And even then, our placement rates are not where we would like for them to be, because of needing to educate those employers of what people with disabilities are capable of doing. Housing, poor health outcomes. Children with disabilities are more likely to be bullied than their able-bodied peers. And this is all because of a lot of stereotypes and stigma. Okay. Discrimination and bullying with people with disabilities. USA Today and Gallup poll found about 5.6% of Americans identify as LGBTQIA+. So that's around 18 million Americans. And again, this number is probably low because this is just the people that responded to a survey or are living openly. A lot of LGBTQI+ people don't live openly because of the communities that they live in, because of the fear that they have, or because of fear of rejection from family and friends. We have seen some positive things happen. We have marriage equality now. We have employment protections, but discrimination is still very high against people in this community. In 2017, the CDC did a risk youth behavior survey, and 33% of LGBTQIA youth reported being bullied in school, and 27.1% reported being cyberbullied as compared to their heterosexual cisgender peers, which only reported 17.1% had been bullied in person and 13.3% had been cyberbullied. And 10% of LGBTQI+ students don't feel safe in schools. Suicide rates are also very high, unfortunately, in the LGBTQIA+ population. The Trevor Project is a great resource if you haven't heard of that already. It has a 24/7 helpline and chat line for LGBTQIA+ youth and adults to call if they're feeling suicidal and talk to an expert, trained expert, of trying to help them get the resources they need so hopefully they don't make the decision to end their life. The second leading cause of death with LGBTQ+ people ages 10 to 24 years of age is suicide, unfortunately. And there's a lot more stats there. I'm looking at time and I want to make sure I give plenty of time to Wondolowski's slides as well. Transgender population reported in a national survey as well that 40% had attempted suicide at one point. And 92% of those said it was before the age of 25. So we've got to be there for our clients. That's why it's so important for us to be an ally or an advocate for this minority group of people, because they don't have as much support as they need. And that can cause them to make some very rash decisions. We won't have time to watch these videos, but I did want to briefly talk about discrimination within the community. So discrimination against each other in the LGBTQIA population. So I've included 3 YouTube videos that do a good job of explaining some of this, that hopefully you'll have time to watch when we email you all this. But racism is common on gay dating apps and expressed preferences. So you might see a profile that says no Asian or Blacks, or just not attracted to Latinx, or no people with disabilities. And we need to work on that as a community because it's not okay. Just because you're not attracted to someone doesn't mean you have to post that on a profile to offend other people. The second link there is a story of Andrew, who is a person with a disability that uses a wheelchair. And it was his first experience of going to a gay bar in Canada, his home country, and how he found it to be a horrible experience because of the fact of accessibility issues at the club and how people treated him like he was not welcomed at the club because of him being in a wheelchair. It's a very powerful story. And then the last one is trans men and women not being accepted into the LGBTQIA population. For instance, transgender males who might have identified as lesbians first are not always welcomed in the lesbian community after they have transitioned, or in the women's rights movement, which a lot of is still going on because of the fact that some people, I want to make sure I say that some people in the lesbian community feel that it is weakening the more masculine and butch population because these individuals are deciding to transition. So again, we'll let y'all watch those later because we've already been an hour into this. So any questions before we move on? I always want to make sure I'm giving time for that.
So we had a question
Okay.
earlier about this with speaking with transgender people.
Mhm.
If you state that someone had bottom surgery or top surgery, is that offensive when speaking of a transgender person? This person had heard these terms on a TV show.
Yes. Okay. So I would not encourage you to ask that question, but if a client or student tells you voluntarily about that information, then that opens the door for communication. But definitely talking about genitalia or surgeries in the trans community can be very offensive to people in the trans community. So I would not recommend asking that unless you're having to do like a medical social history, then it might be appropriate to ask it. But I wouldn't just ask somebody, hey, have you had bottom surgery? Because that could be seen as very offensive. But yeah, so, and if you're not familiar with those terms, top surgery usually is referring to removing breast tissue and shaping the chest more into a male looking chest. Bottom surgery could be one of two things. That could be removing a penis and testes and doing a reconstructive surgery to create a vagina, or it could be removing the vagina and trying to create a testes and a penis onto the physical body. Those are all of those are very intrusive surgeries with the potential of a lot of complications. They're also very expensive surgeries. So a lot of times people in the trans community may not be able to afford those options. And so they do other types of binders for the chest or tucking of the penis to make it look more feminine in the way that they're dressed. And so there's a lot of things that go into the trans lifestyle that a lot of us that are cisgender just don't understand and we don't have to do. So did that answer the question?
Yes. And we have another comment. One of my consumers lived in a small town and she had surgery to transition to female.
Mhm.
She experienced a lot of discrimination in her community.
And that's not uncommon, unfortunately. So the best thing we can do in a situation like that is just try to advocate and provide resources to that client. Because unfortunately, a lot of times that is not uncommon that happens to people in the trans community. Anything else before we move forward? Okay. So we'll briefly talk about intersectionality. You're going to probably have some clients that identify as both a person with a disability and someone that identifies as LGBTQI+. Archer did a study in 2018 that showed about 30% of adult males and 36% of adult females identified as both a person with a disability and part of the LGBTQIA+ community. One theory is that it's a much higher incident rate overall because of, the discrimination rate goes up higher when you are from two different minority populations. So for instance, another example besides disability is trans Black women and trans Latino women have a sky high rate of murder and assault compared to cisgender females. So when we have compounding identities, then we have more stigma, we have more bias, and we have more prejudice, unfortunately. So this was actually something that Dr. Wondolowski and I came up with together. So Dr. Wondolowski, do you want to talk about disability, and then I'll talk about LGBTQ+?
Sure. So in terms of, this wonderful pandemic that we've all found ourselves in, I'm sure many of us have had our own reactions and have had areas of our lives that have been impacted. Maybe we've lost people. Maybe we were skeptical about getting vaccinated, or still are, or are unable to get vaccinated due to pre-existing health conditions. Maybe you're very anxious about returning and reintegrating back into a society because you don't want to get COVID-19, right? But what we found is that with the vaccine distribution, and many of you are probably aware of this because you work within different health services arenas, but there has been drastically unequal access to things like vaccines, the preventative care, the masks, gloves. I will always remember the toilet paper and Lysol shortage of 2020. But now individuals who may have limited access to transportation, or maybe they need assistance in the home, all of a sudden home care aides were not coming. And so who was doing meal prep, things like that. Again, the immunocompromised subpopulation within those who identify as having a disability are at increased risk. Fear of prioritization by administrative and medical attending personnel, meaning that, oh, they already have a disability, let's take care of the healthy person first. But what else can you guys think of? How has identifying as a person with a disability led to negative consequences in light of COVID-19?
Well, I think of people who need to, say, for instance, somebody who uses Braille and needs to, like they're at the ATM and they need to touch in order to read the directions, or in an elevator or something like that. This is back when we thought we weren't quite sure how COVID-19 was passed. And so touching things was, created a lot of problems for people. So that was just one way that I thought of it. Or people who needed, wheelchair assistance and they had to push wheelchairs, or they needed a lot of close contact in order to be able to, complete their ADLs and things like that.
Absolutely. And we also have to recognize that not all clients or individuals who identify as having a disability live in urban areas. And so everybody moved to, telecommuting and telehealth and all these different things. But what if you lived in an area where maybe you don't have broadband internet?
We have a comment from someone: most of my supported employment consumers did not want employment, to find employment at this time.
Did they mention to you why?
It was mostly out of fear of, with the social distancing and not wanting to get COVID. So they just, I'm not going to say use that as an excuse, but it was just another barrier that they had to face during this time.
Absolutely. I'll tell you that our university went to their first in-person graduation this May. Now, I am an individual who identifies as having a disability. I am immunocompromised due to some of the medications that I do take. And so I went from being around 2 dogs and somebody tossing groceries into my car once a month to now I'm surrounded by 600 people, their parents, their loved ones who I don't know from Adam's house cat. And I started to have a full-on panic attack because even though I had my vaccinations and I had the appropriate time, the 2 weeks afterwards for it to take, we now have these mutant strains, we now have this, we now have that. And my dean actually sent me home. It's a very scary COVID-19 and hopefully soon post-COVID-19 world that we will be living in for some time.
So I'll talk briefly about the LGBTQ plus community and COVID-19. A lot of LGBTQ plus people reported that they worked in a lot of the highly affected industries. They worked in the hotels, the resorts, the theme parks, the restaurants that all shut down, and then they didn't have employment. And so it was really stressful for a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community. Even before the pandemic happened, rates of unemployment, living in poverty, and possible housing insecurities were higher than their heterosexual counterparts before the pandemic. I'll give you an example. In bigger cities like Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles, Denver, we have a lot of LGBTQ plus youth that when they've come out to their family, and unfortunately sometimes they don't get the support that they need, that they leave and they go to these bigger cities that are gay friendly. And then they don't have anywhere to live. So they're living in a hostel or they're living on the street. And then COVID happened. And what are you supposed to do during a worldwide pandemic if you don't have stable housing? So it was a very scary time for some people in the LGBTQ plus community. Lack of accessible medical care was a problem before the pandemic, especially for people that identify as transgender or non-binary. They're not always comfortable to go to the doctor because they're afraid of rejection. They're afraid of a doctor saying, well, I can't treat you because I don't know enough about it, or I have a moral or religious, I'm morally or religious, don't feel like it's my place to treat you for what you're needing treated. Even though, just like our code of ethics, we're not supposed to do any harm. The Hippocratic Oath, the doctors are not supposed to do any harm either. But I hear stories all the time of students and clients that have been rejected by their doctor, and that was before COVID. Older LGBTQ plus individuals also experience discrimination when they're looking for a place to retire. Some nursing homes and some assisted livings are not really knowledgeable enough of how to handle when a LGBTQ plus couple wants to retire together. So these were all things that were important to look at in the LGBTQ plus community when COVID started and as it continues. We have something in the chat that just popped up.
Would you like me to read it?
I'm reading it. Yes. So the question is basically if you're doing an assessment such as a behavioral health assessment and your client identifies as non-binary and they tell you that they've had top surgery, Can you diagnose this person with gender dysphoria? If the person has not already been diagnosed and you have that diagnostic privilege, then you can, but I would discuss that with the client, because some clients that are transgender, if they're not out very much, they really don't want that documented. And for us to do our job, we want to make sure we're doing it ethically, and we want to make sure that we're representing our clients as they are. But I'd have a conversation with that client and say, have you ever heard of this diagnosis before? Has a doctor ever given you this diagnosis before? Most likely, if insurance helped paid for a surgery, then they already have that diagnosis. But until a client feels comfortable with you, they may not disclose that. So, because I experienced that, the only transgender client that I ever had the privilege to work with, I assumed and I thought when I met the client that they might be trans, but it was about session 2 or 3 before the client really trusted me enough and we had that rapport built enough that they opened up and disclosed that they actually were a person who identified as transgender. And they said they were guarded to tell me because they didn't know how I would react. They were afraid that I would reject them like one counselor had done before. And so I made sure to let the client know, no, I accept you as you are. You were welcome in my office, and thank you so much for telling me, about yourself, about who you truly are. So yeah, if you have that privilege, because I know some of us that are CRCs, we can't diagnose. It really depends on, but I know in Louisiana, there is a licensed rehabilitation counselor. That's a little bit different than here in Arkansas. So I just have a conversation with the client before I put that on the paperwork to make sure that they're okay with that. Does that make sense? Anybody have any follow-up questions with that? Okay. All right, let's move forward then. Here's a couple of quotes here. So there's just been a lot of discrimination historically, unfortunately, with LGBTQ plus communities of color, low-income households, and people with disabilities. And the pandemic has not helped that. And there's nearly 5 million LGBTQ workers that are having financial hardship at this time. And depending on the government's responses has really been how people are getting assistance. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wondolowski.
All right, so can you guys see me? I can't see myself, so.
Yes.
Okay. So I wanted to start by just, we gave you the terminology, and hopefully now you have some working knowledge of terms to use and when they may be appropriate. And now we wanted to shift your focus to kind of the systemic nature of all of this as it relates to vocational rehab and returning people to work, getting them integrated into society, things like that. And so nationally, we just began really taking inventory of how many couple households are same-sex couple households. And nationally, it's 1.5%, give or take, 0.1. Now in Louisiana, it's lower than the national average. It's 1.2. And New Mexico, I'll tell you, y'all from New Mexico, I'm moving. Because in doing some of the state-based research, I was impressed. And so in New Mexico, it's 2%, so it's higher than the national average. And so I kind of want you guys just to popcorn out there, either in the chat or using your microphones, but I have healthcare access and use because Dr. Stevens had kind of began speaking about it. I wanted to go into a little bit more detail. But think about employment, or when we work with transition age youth, right? Why do people go to work? They need money, right? And so what does money get us?
Pay the bills, food,
Okay.
school.
Roof over our head, financial independence, benefits. And so when we talk about healthcare access, we know that for individuals who have and identify as being part of the disability community, healthcare access is important. The very nature of belonging to this community is because we have some needs that need to be addressed, and are often because we live here, not cheap. And so whether it's private or public insurance, it's going to determine who our providers may be. It's going to determine what we can or cannot afford. And then we add in that intersectionality of identifying also as part of the LGBTQIA+ community. And so we talked a little bit about the assault, unfortunately, the murders that do occur at very high levels, specifically with transgender individuals, but in this community as a whole. But recent studies have shown that individuals who identify as LGBTQ+ have visibly seen their doctor or provider become uncomfortable when discussing their sexual orientation or perceived sexual orientation. They may have used harsh or abusive language. They may have intentionally just dismissed partners. And we're going to talk about the constructed family rather than the nuclear family, or may actually have conducted themselves completely inappropriately and had unwanted physical contact. Again, when we specifically pull out the data for those who identify as transgender, we see that these issues, concerns get exponentially greater. So we have 33% that said that they had to actually teach their doctor or provider about transgender individuals, just so that they can get the care. So it's the student teaching the sage. And so that goes back to one of the very first slides that Dr. Stevens was speaking to, in that they shouldn't be your expert. Now, you always want to get their worldview. You want to know how they identify because you respect them. But they shouldn't be telling you about medicines or this or that, or, behavioral interventions or things that may work. Again, that visible uncomfortableness, 38% this time, specifically to gender identity. And 1/4 just outright refused to give medical treatment related to gender transition. Now, Arkansas, which is where Dr. Stevens and I are, just recently in the 116th Congress passed this medical conscience bill that says that if it is not a life-saving procedure, which transition rarely is, although it can be at times, they can say, nah. Just because it would it would weigh heavily on the conscience. And I'm quite open to the idea that there may be some of you on the other sides of your computer that are like, yeah, I wouldn't do it either. I don't agree with that. And that's fair. That's you're right. But one of the beauties of living in America is having, supposedly, freedom to live as you choose, so long as it doesn't hurt another individual. And so when we talk about gender transition, when we talk about living your true authentic life, which we know for not only the LGBTQIA plus communities, but the disability communities as well, when you can live your authentic life, when you're not ashamed to express who you are, however you are, again, just so long as you're not harming other people, who are we to impose what we believe on others? Again, you don't have to endorse a community. You don't have to lead the gay pride parade. You don't have to lead the next, disability rights movement. But you can respect someone as a fellow human being. Just thought. %, so 1/3, said that a doctor or provider, even when being given the correct, gender identity and the preferred pronouns or preferred name, deliberately misgendered or used the dead name. Here again in Arkansas, as progressive as we are, in this last legislative session, there was a bill that was being pushed that said that K-12 teachers and other workers didn't have to use preferred names. But think about that. You know what your name is, and you know that when you hear it, your ears perk up, even if you're not the only one in the room. You're like, huh? What if you went through your day in, day out, being called George, Martha? Like, that is not my name. That is not me. You don't even know me. Or what if people just refuse to see you at all? You don't matter. Your life doesn't matter. This is the lived experience of people with disability, but also who identify as being part of the LGBTQ plus community, more specifically, individuals who identify as transgender. And so we were aware that there was some possible representation from some Navajo Nation and from, I believe it was Fort Mojave. Is there any other groups that are here today in terms of tribal nations? Okay, so Dr. Stevens, I'm going to punt this back to you for a second.
Okay. And I put in the chat, I appreciate that Dr. Wondolowski talked about that bill. Arkansas passed several anti-trans bills this year, but that bill about dead names did fail, just so in case you were wondering. Other bills did not, but we're not here to talk about Arkansas law today. There's a lot to talk about. But so tribal nations and the LGBTQ plus community, I actually told Dr. Benton, thank you for asking us to talk about this because I educated myself on some new resources that I wasn't familiar with before. So the term Two-Spirit is common in Native American and First Natives terminology. And it's just an umbrella term of First Nation people whose individual spirits were a blend of female and male spirits. It's really been reclaimed a lot in the last 20 years to honor the heritage and provide an alternate to gay, lesbian, or transgender terminology. And I've provided the resources here that you'll have in your resource packet and also in the PowerPoint. I'm not going to try to pronounce this because I don't want to butcher it. But Two-Spirit comes from this word here that literally translates into two spirits from the Anishinaabe. I know I'm going to butcher these. I practiced them before, but I don't feel confident in myself that I'm saying them correct language. And the annual Intertribe Native American First Nations Gay and Lesbian American Conference in Winnipeg, Canada actually adopted this. Okay. The National Congress of American Indians provided dozens of examples on this website. So for example, Navajo was one that we were told there might be some individuals that come from that culture. So male and female and intersecticide was Nadele, I think is how you say it. Again, I'm sorry if I am mispronouncing. And then there's one for gender class category, singular and plural. And the loose translation is one in a constant state of change, one who changes or being transformed. And this is just a fun fact that I learned as well. Even though we have marriage equality as a national law now, there's only about 24 tribes in the United States and Canada that have recognized same-sex marriages that align with our national law. And there's a resource there where you can look into that more. But I found that interesting. So it's really up to tribal laws in some of these Native American and First Nations groups of people of how they view the LGBTQ plus community. Okay.
Now, Dr. Stevens doesn't know that I threw this in here, but I love how for the Navajo Nation, it talks about state of change and fluidity and one who changes or transforms. And it's like this beautiful butterfly type imagery. Mm-hmm. However, if you look at the Mojave Nation, their loose translation is coward. And so it's not that just because you identify as being Native American or First Nations persons that you necessarily are just welcomed in this way. Sorry, apparently my dogs are upset by it too. But that it really does vary from tribe to tribe. And so now we just really wanted to bring it to the workplace and talk about this for just, briefly, right? Because we need to work to make money. We know that working results in higher quality of life and well-being overall for not only people with disabilities, but people who identify as part of LGBTQIA+. But knowing what we know now about some of the discriminations with the LGBTQIA+ community, knowing what we know and what we have known based on our experiences with the disability communities, I really want to start bringing your attention to connecting those dots and identifying the intersectionalities. In fiscal year 2020, the EEOC reported 1,857 different filings for LGBT-based discrimination in the workplace. And so maybe for a nation for a whole year, that doesn't seem like a lot. It does to me, though. I think even one is too many. Because what they're saying is, based on who you love, based on how you identify, I'm going to limit your opportunity to participate in society in some way. And there was a TED Talk that I once watched, and I share it in my diversity courses all the time. And this woman speaks about a philosophy that she has, and that is flip it to test it. And she says that if we go around saying that we don't have biases or we don't have prejudices, one, we're fooling ourselves. Because it's only when we are aware of them that we can run boldly at them and confront them and address them and start to resolve them. And she's been asked so often, how do I know if it's biased? I don't know what I don't know. Well, the question then begins to say, okay, flip it. Instead of LGBT based, what if we said race-based, gender-based, disability status-based? As I replaced that characteristic, did any one of those bother you more than others? Because again, depending on what your worldview is, what your influences have been, you may not have been exposed to the LGBTQ plus community. And so you're learning through all these different mediums, but you have little firsthand experience or secondhand experience. And so 35%, over a third of LGBTQ plus people have identified that they have made specific decisions about where to work, just so that they could avoid being discriminated against. Another third also said that they avoided public places like stores or restaurants. So again, if you don't identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community, if you're being told that because of who you love or because of how you express yourself, you need to be worried about going to Walmart. You need to be worried about going to the post office. Flip it to test it. What if it was something that applied to you? Individuals who identify as transgender and those who have been college educated are more likely than others to have avoided potentially discriminatory workplaces. And so if we're working to get students transitioned into employment or even through school to employment, then we need to really think about these things and be aware of who our non-discriminatory or LGBTQ plus inclusive employers and universities are. %53%, so half of those who identify as transgender expressed that discrimination either moderately or significantly affected their capacity to be hired. And 4 in 10 said that it was negatively affected to a significant degree. %47%, again, almost half, moderate or significant impact on their ability to retain employment. So they may have gotten the job, but for some reason there was discriminatory practices occurring on the job. Now, for our Black or Indigenous people of color who also identify as LGBTQ+, we found that 51% were reporting discrimination at moderate or significantly affecting their ability to be hired versus 33% of white respondents. So again, the intersectionality, right? So now we have sexual orientation, we have gender identity, we have race and ethnicity. And so as Dr. Stevens had mentioned earlier, the compounding and the different kinds of stigma, discrimination, and prejudices that are then developed from that. Something else we also need to take into consideration, right? We've heard of FMLA, we've heard of the different provisions for paid leave that were allocated out because of COVID-19. However, the United States actually doesn't have any permanent national paid leave policy in place. It's the only outlier among industrialized countries. And so when we look at the Census Bureau data from 2020, we know that only 18.4% of American households identify in the traditional nuclear family structure. You know, we think of the 2.5 kids, the fence, the dog, mother, father. But most of America lives outside of that. And so millions of people we're finding are actually relying on their chosen family, whether it be because their nuclear family has unfortunately rejected them based on who they are, their authentic self, or if they have moved away from maybe more conservative areas to more gay-friendly or LGBTQ plus friendlier environments. But it could also be, you know, a friend. We see this a lot with children who come from traumatic childhoods, where they may not necessarily call mom or dad, but guess what? I'm gonna call my best friend's mom, because that's mom to me. The problem is that if she's my emergency contact, but she's not blood related, she's not listed anywhere, then all of a sudden we have no rights, when really they're closer than those individuals relationally, just not biologically. Again, looking at the systemic nature of all of this, right? We know that being formerly incarcerated is going to prove to be a challenge when returning people to work. And so when we have individuals who identify as LGBTQIA+, who have also been formerly incarcerated, so we know, based on what we just spoke about, that they already have limited options, right? Because they're being very selective about where they can work, not because they're bougie or, you know, they're too picky, but it's because they don't want to be discriminated against, because they want to actually work in a place that may accept them. And so when we're working with this population specifically, there are some other things that we need to take into consideration, right? So with the LGBTQ plus community who have been incarcerated, we know that there are unique healthcare needs while they're incarcerated, but also when they're released. We know that there's discrimination. We have housing details, right? Special POPs and stuff like that. Oftentimes, these individuals will end up in segregated housing by themselves. And they say it's to protect them, and it very well may, but we also know that being in segregation for long periods of time takes a serious negative toll on any person. For those who live with HIV or AIDS, particularly those who identify as Black men, Black transgender women, are LGBTQ+, and all of these individuals, all of these populations are going to face rampant racially targeted criminalization, and overall are going to be underserved by healthcare systems. Because of a number of factors that lead to higher criminalization of individuals who identify as LGBTQ+, we find that individuals who, and I'll use an umbrella term, sexual minorities, are incarcerated 3 times higher than the general US incarceration rates. And in specifically, when you add the intersection of race into this, we know that Black transgender women are incarcerated 10 times the rate of the general pop. And so, depending on whether when you were incarcerated, you caught a felony, or if it was just, petty theft, something. Not that I'm okay in petty theft, but it's going to have different residual repercussions on where you can apply for housing. It's going to have different repercussions on where you can work, if and when you can go to school, as well as the structural bias that we've continued to see over time show itself through the legal system. And so there needs to be a real focus on the reentry policies and programs in making sure that they're accessible or at least malleable for these particular communities or populations. And so being an advocate, speaking to the policymakers regarding this community is really going to help lessen recidivism rates, because oftentimes when people get out into the community again after being incarcerated, what we find is that because of institutionalization, because of the challenges that they're facing left and right with housing, which we know is disproportionately poorer for the LGBTQ+ community. They actually pay higher interest rates and loan rates. And then, challenges in work, workplace discrimination, all of these different things. There really needs to be a targeted response. So when we talk about probation and parole, again, the system is still monitoring you to some degree, whether you wear, a monitor or what have you. And so for those individuals who identify as transgender, it can sometimes be seen as an electric leash in the sense that they are unable to access basic services. They can't use sex segregated or, sex segregated shelters or dress in accordance with their gender identity. Rather, they're being discriminated against, and prejudice is being thrown or shown through the system, right? And so what if you couldn't travel because of because your paperwork didn't match your expression? What if you identify as female, but your license says male? Or what if you go up to, you know, somebody, say your name is this, and that's not what it says on your official documents. Travel is often a necessary piece of all this. Checking in, having a legal ID is something that's a piece of this. But many states don't actually have policies for that. So I wanted to talk about some federal legislation as well as state laws that are specific to Louisiana and New Mexico. And then I see that we're running really close on time. So I'm glad that we're going to be able to get these slides to you, because there's a bit more that we did want to get to. But so just a really quick kind of history highlights. So 1969 is really when the gay rights movement took off, right? With the riots at Stonewall Inn. 1973, we see the formation of Lambda Legal, which is really like the first gay rights, LGBT kind of advocacy groups. National March on Washington was the first gay rights march of its kind. Wisconsin comes on the books in 1982, the first state to outlaw discrimination based on sexual orientation. Now in 1985, we have the Hate Crime Sentencing Enhancement Act. And that goes through a couple different revisions. And for some, this is maintained, it hasn't changed. And it's specifically what it says is it includes sexual orientation as a protected characteristic. Okay. Couple years later, the DSM-3 TR then says, you know what? We're going to take out ego dystonic homosexuality, because that was the final diagnosis for pathologizing homosexuality. Before that, homosexuality was in the DSM-1, and then we had sexual orientation disturbance. So again, think about person first language. Think about how just these terms are really conveying a negative, pejorative connotation to all of these things. We have the Hate Crime Sentencing Act, which now applies gender expression. But then in 1996, we have individuals coming in and say, whoa, 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 we need to defend marriage. And so now we have, you know, marriage is only between a man and a woman, can't be called marriage. 4 years later, Vermont's like, fine, we want civil unions. Now, Lawrence v. Texas is an interesting one, because what that says is that up until 2003, there were still sodomy laws on the books in Texas. And so regardless that you were of age, regardless that you were consenting, if it was male and male sexual contact that included penetration, even in 2003, you could be sent to jail. And so in 2003, those got thrown out the window. 2010, US Board of Education releases the Dear Colleague letter that says, okay, our individuals who identify as gender non-binary or having different sexual orientations, they're going to be protected in our schools. Now, we tried with the Employment Non-Discrimination Act to get that to go through in 2013 so that there would be protections in employment. However, it fell short and it never got passed. In 2015, however, we had the Obergefell versus Hodges ruling. Does anybody know what that one did? No cheating. So think about it, 2015, that's only 6 years ago. Where were you 6 years ago? Who were you dating? Maybe you were married. It was only 6 years ago that individuals who identify as being part of the LGBTQIA plus community were granted marriage equality. And that said that if married, that individuals and their spouses, whether same sex or opposite sex, could now actually have their partners in the hospital room with them if they were in critical care, because before they couldn't. They could file joint taxes. They could be on each other's benefits at work. Because any state that is upholding this ruling also has to uphold the benefits clauses to it as well. However, what we did see is that within days of this ruling, states started to say no. They threatened to push for sovereignty and things like that. And so with Hively versus Ivy Tech Community College of Indiana, we see the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is now prohibiting workplace discrimination based on sexual orientation. And before, during the Clinton era, where we had the don't ask, don't tell, in terms of LGBTQI individuals and serving in the armed forces, in 2017, President Trump issued the memorandum that said, okay, we need to take individuals who identify as transgender out of the armed forces, later saying that he leaves it up to Secretary of Defense Norquist, who then supported President Trump's position with the memorandum 19004.
Dr. Wondolowski, I hate to interrupt you, but we have 1 minute left.
I know.
Can you put up our email addresses? Sorry that we ran out of time. We had more information than we had time for. There it is. So thank you all for coming. If you have follow-up questions that we did not get to, please reach out to us. We would love to talk to you further. 2 hours seems like a lot of time, but when we put this together, we obviously could have gone for 3, it looks like, which is not a bad thing. But please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you if you have specific questions that maybe you didn't get a chance to talk to us about.
And we also wanted to add that as part of this program, we want to do a follow-up with you guys to answer those questions for you through a recording. Again, as we've been saying, you're going to get these PowerPoints. You're going to get a very comprehensive, I think, resource packet. Thankfully, it's electronic, otherwise the rainforest would cry, but hopefully that helps as well.
All right. Thanks again for coming, and we hope to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just as a reminder, I will be sending out an evaluation form. Please just click on the link and fill out the evaluation. Also, the recording, the PowerPoint, and the resource guide will be posted to Project D3's website. So that's www.projectd3.com. So I will include that in the evaluation email when I send it out. So, and I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you to Dr. Wondolowski, Dr. Stevens for presenting this very informative. It was a lot of great information. I learned a lot today. Thank you very much. And
Thank you for having us.
have a
Thank
great
you.
day, everyone. Thank you.